former writer at the Huffington Post, founding editor at Mediaite, and I've recently migrated to the startup world. And I work with Hashimble, and I co-founded Change the Ratio, which raises visibility for women in tech. But before all that, I used to be a lawyer, and how I spent my lawyer money was a lot of travel. So this one's called From Russia with Love and Squalor. It must be because I had a fairly sheltered suburban childhood. Toronto Jews represent? But for a time, I was something of an experience junkie. Once I was grown up enough to make my own money and not get in trouble for my parents, well, not too much trouble, I embraced the joy of the random travel experience. Paragliding in Turkey, chasing soccer-playing lawyers in Malta, competing in the gay games in Sydney. I'm straight, but they don't ask. And perhaps the scariest to my parents, moving to New York. But as a matter of personal philosophy, I have generally said, why not? Far more often than either of why or not. Which is how I found myself in the airport of St. Petersburg, Russia, purchasing a one-way ticket on Aeroflot, currently duking it out with Air Namibia and Air Chad for the title of worst airline ever. This probably begs the question of what I was doing in St. Petersburg in the first place. As it happens, it was a short flight from Stockholm, Sweden, where I was living at the time. It's here that I will once again note that I was a lawyer. I was working at my law firm there. I know it kills the glam vibe that I was going for, but in the spirit of authenticity. It was May 2000, and I had come to Russia for the World Hockey Championships, where I spent 2 weeks cheering on my home team of Canada and running about with a tape recorder and a camera in an attempt to play freelance journalist. Though a die-hard Canadian patriot, I had never been much for hockey and only learned to love the game during my time living in Sweden, where a chance encounter with members of the Canadian hockey team convinced me that hockey was a sport worth watching, or at the very least was played by a very strapping and manly bunch. But I digress. For 2 weeks, I stayed at the Hotel Pribaltiska, or the Prib, as I like to call it, along with 13 out of the 14 competing hockey teams. The Russians were sequestered to help their focus. They were eliminated in semis. Most teams boasted bona fide NHL players whose teams have been eliminated from the playoffs. Just any hockey fans here at all? Okay. So right now, the playoffs were going on for the Stanley Cup, and so basically any team members who were not playing in the Stanley Cup or in the playoffs for the Stanley Cup basically went over to play in the World Hockey Championships, which is how I made some interesting friends. Over the next 2 weeks, I befriended a number of the above-mentioned Prib dwellers and had a few encounters that amounted to some good shots in the arm for an experienced junkie like myself, including the following. Driving around town in a limousine with supermodel Carol Alt. You have not known humiliation until you've received diet tips from a supermodel. Apparently, bread was toxic, which she told me after I took a roll off the tray and took a big bite of it. Carol came to be in Russia, bored and in need of a friend because her boyfriend, now husband, Alexei Yashin, was the star of the Russian team and was thus locked far, far away from her glamorous Soviet-era hotel room. I was a pale but serviceable substitute. Not that way, but just to spend time with. Once, when I was hungry, I hid in a bathroom in order to eat a banana. I also received a love note from a 12-year-old Russian boy named Igor after being voted number 2 of the top 5 fans on Finnish TV. I still have no idea how I didn't make number 1. This was actually a real thing. And finally, there was fending off the lame advances of hockey players, at least in week 1. Week 2 was when the wives and the girlfriends came. Really. Let the record reflect, as far as I was concerned, all stick handling and goal scoring was strictly limited to the ice. With the foolhardiness of one who has never spent time in the Gulag, I ignored the dates on my temporary Russian visa and extended my trip. Just like that. My return flight came and went. I was too busy eschewing carbohydrates with Carol and downing shooters on the second floor. On the day of my departure, I breezed into the airport with no visa and no ticket. Fortunately, the nice Russian consul pretended not to notice in exchange for the assorted Scandinavian currency and the last of my worthless rubles. Finmarks, Swedish kroner, and rubles. Capitalism. And then, of course, there was Aeroflot. I'd managed to snag the last seat on the first flight out, congratulating myself on trading the security of flying an airline with a proven safety record for a cut-rate deal and the chance to stare death in the face. I caught a lift to the airport with a contingent from Team Canada, lugging the giant pink suitcase I'd gotten for my bat mitzvah, back in the days before suitcases had wheels. It was the tackiest, most giant pink thing ever. And as a side note, which I didn't write, while I was not staying at the Crib because it got expensive, Carol stored it in her room for me. So she has experience with non-style. The one key player I had had the hots for, Jeff Finley of the St. Louis Blues, now an assistant coach in Kelowna, BC, continued to not notice me, giant suitcase notwithstanding. But I had a whole flight. With stale vodka in my veins and mile-high daydreams in my head, I boarded the aircraft, or, according to Aeroflot, whatever passed for one. Thus followed the most bizarre and, I pray, unrepeatable flight of my life. The seats, which were covered in random mismatched swatches of fabric, appeared to have been scavenged from other airplanes. This theory seemed to be borne out by the fact that I occupied 6D and the guy beside me was in 10F. During the safety demonstration, the stewardess got tangled in the oxygen mask, which refused to untangle. There may have been a safety slide, but I didn't know where, and if the stewardess knew she wasn't telling, distracted as she was by the fact that her hands were now tied together. Team Canada was somewhere behind me, along with a cute hockey player who, if this plane went down, would die without knowing I existed. There was no escape from the fear except sleep, so that's what I did. I awoke mid-flight to find my head on the shoulder of the tolerant stranger beside me. I don't know what the word for drool is in Russian, but I think he forgave me. Then suddenly, mercifully, and bumpily, we were on the ground. So were the contents of my tray table, but why be picky? I was alive. And in one piece. And I hadn't eaten bread for 3 whole days. Life was good. I would have bid a cheerful adieu to my flight mates, except they were already gone. I still remember the way Jeff Finley's back looked walking away from me. Claiming my giant pink suitcase, I walked on shaky legs out of the terminal towards the gleaming organization of Stockholm and away from grievous bodily harm. Behind me, secured with false confidence and masking tape, was our plane, and behind that, somewhere beyond the friendly Aeroflot skies, stood the Crib. I'd never forget it, chiefly because I'd survived it. But after that, my parents were cool with New York. Any questions?